Hey, what's up, and welcome to Overtime Podcast. My name is Jeremy. I'm the content director here at Northpoint, and Overtime is where we take Sunday's message further in hopes it is helpful for you in your life and your faith. And today I get to sit with Jordan Geist, our associate pastor, Jen Mazzola, a member of our teaching team, and Christy Gordon, a member of our content team here at Northpoint. And we just get to talk about what in the world we do with those people in our life. It's been an incredible series talking about those people. It's been very challenging. And in the podcast, we get to just kind of break this down a little bit more. So as always, be sure to subscribe, and we hope you enjoy the podcast.
I'm not going to lie, I didn't know it's your birthday.
You did?
It really is? No, I didn't.
Oh, yeah.
Happy birthday.
Oh, happy
That's
birthday.
really exciting.
Yeah, I feel like
I
you do
don't
this.
feel like it's like.
I think it's cool. I think you're a cool person. It's
I
your
mean,
birthday.
I think my birthday's cool. I like my birthday. I'm not anti-birthday. I just don't feel. It's kind of like hugs.
Oh, yeah.
Like I'm not anti-hug. I'll
Yeah.
totally hug anybody. But
Will you
I,
really?
Like, yeah, I'll hug.
I've never hugged you.
Well, we don't have to hug, but I do. I don't hate them. I just don't like. I literally, speaking of those people, I'm one of those people. It's just not even on my radar.
Yeah.
Like that's not the first thing I think of when I walk in a room. Whereas some people are like a Jen Ferguson, it's the first thing she thinks of when she walks in a room, and I'm like, I don't know why you.
Yeah,
Are you the first thing you think about is hugs?
kind of.
Yeah,
So
I just.
for me, this podcast has begun. This is
we've
how we're
already
started.
started jumping in.
Yeah,
Can you edit
we've
that like
started.
that?
So Josh,
Okay.
hopefully you're cutting and everything, because I think this is a great way to start. Because I'm one of those people who, before the event has even ended, I'm picturing the goodbye, and it's stressing me out. Because I'm wondering, are we gonna have to hug, like as we leave? And so I'm thinking, like, in 5 minutes, we're either gonna handshake, we're gonna hug, we're just gonna wave at each other from 5 feet away, and that bothers me a lot. I'd rather just like leave, and not have to deal with like the question of what are we gonna do when we depart from one another.
Yeah, that's an awkward moment for you.
Yep.
What do they call that? The goodbye where you just take off and no one knew you left, like an Irish goodbye.
Oh,
or something.
yeah.
There's like a
Yeah,
phrase for
yeah.
that. I don't want to do that. I don't want to be those people.
Yeah, I'll be those people.
But I also don't know that I feel like I need to hug you to say goodbye.
Yeah.
But if you go in for a hug, I'll meet you.
Yeah.
Okay,
I think for
I'm
the
gonna
longest
remember
time.
No, now I don't want to.
I think for the longest time, Jordan's dad and I had the most awkward interactions of like hello and goodbye, like weird handshakes, awkward hugs. It was great. Like it should have become a thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know, I think I have pinpointed why I have a hard time with hugs. It's being not that tall of a man. I actually don't think it's like affection or anything. It's weird. Like, so Barry always gave me a hard time that I wasn't a hugger because my brother, he's more introverted, he's not a hugger. I'm like, actually, Barry, it's like when I have to go sideways into your chest, something about that feels emasculating. Like something about that feels like, as I'm just like,
Well, for those who don't know, Barry is our executive director here at Northpoint.
Yeah.
And he's just this big, burly, manly man.
Yeah.
And I will agree, when I get hugged by him, like my head gets like pulled into his chest.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's. I think he's trying to do like a ABBA kind of hug, but
The problem is that y'all resist it. You have to lean into the all.
Just like,
you have to lean into
You
it.
just have to accept the fact that you're smaller than Barry. That's
Yeah.
okay. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the same thing with Buck. I kind of like my chin goes up.
Yeah.
I'm like,
I think
like
Buck and
my mom's
I-
like 5 feet tall and I can like, wrap her and it's fine. It's not just because my mom, it's like the height is
But see,
great.
now it makes me feel bad though that I'm the person that's like, oh, can I give you a hug? Like, because the person on their side would be like, absolutely not.
That's actually,
like,
I think I feel that too. Like, though, if
You
somebody's
know?
not a hugger, it's pretty. I don't usually initiate a hug. I will like hug back.
I think there's multiple levels of not a hugger though. Like I want, if you ever say, oh, and you like, we hug, I'm not going to be upset. I don't feel uncomfortable, but I'm just not going to probably initiate it. But other than Jeremy, who's just like, it sounds like you just don't want to hug.
I'm like, if you initiate a hug, I'm fine. I get stressed out about like, am I gonna have to do it? What are we gonna do? I think when I like visit, even like, when I see family members and stuff, and they do different handshakes than I do, like I'm just a handshaker.
Yeah.
Like don't like this thing and like all of that. I'm like,
You don't like the
should we text
dabbing
it?
you up?
Well, should we
fist
like
bump?
text ahead of time to talk about? Are we gonna do that when we see one another in front of a group of people? Like I want to know those
Oh,
things.
my goodness.
So I typically just go fist bump or nothing. Like.
I wonder when Jordan was sharing, is it this past week that you did the different layers of the Enneagram, like where you did
Yeah, this
like
past Sunday.
health
The
versus
judgment,
unhealth? I'm
yeah.
like listening to Jeremy. I'm like, I wonder where that falls on his scale of health and unhealth.
wow.
Like the healthier
Yeah.
you are, the more you're like,
I'm a 6. I display unhealthy attributes of a 3 when I am in unhealth. And so 3 is based on what you do, your performance. So I'd be very embarrassed in front of
If you
people
hugged incorrectly.
Yeah, yep.
Yep.
If I didn't perform well enough in the hello or goodbye rituals that us humans do.
All right, can I start us off with like an actual legit
Yeah.
question? So I've heard a lot of great feedback in like community groups and just little different circles and social circles from Northpoint about this series. And I was just curious if either of you have gotten any like pushback on those people, meaning like, well, yeah, but there are these people. Surely you don't mean we have to like lean in and think on and consider those people, or no pushback?
I don't know. I talked to one gentleman who, but then I think we ironically, like we answered it later on. He was like, hey, but doesn't God, his anger, he's clearly angry at people. Like he has this like righteous kind of judgment thing. And then that's what we talked about in part 2. And I was like, well, that's his, it's not ours. And so that was a good conversation. I mean, that's a summarized version of a conversation. And he wasn't like in a challenge. He was just really curious. But even that, it wasn't like we don't really have to. It's like a hard thing to argue. It's like, I think probably a lot of people feel it. Like probably a lot of people are like, but they're outside the bounds. They're probably not. But I don't think you'd come in and like say out loud, but like Jesus says, I don't have to love that person. Because that's hard to say.
Yeah, I think most people wouldn't push back against like the series content or like Jordan and myself. I think if they're pushing back against Jesus. And I think that's understandable because people were very uncomfortable in the first century with Jesus's ethic of how he treated those people. And that was the whole point of it all, right? And so I think I haven't gotten a lot of people push back on it. I've had a lot of people come up to me and say, dang, this is hard.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, I don't really want to hear this.
Yeah, like I don't want to come to the rest of the series. One person told me that because it's just challenging, which I think is helpful, but it is challenging. But
I think more people probably loved that we addressed it, even though they felt uncomfortable, because I don't know that there's anyone, if you're really being honest, everyone has those people, right?
Yes.
So I think it's something that was super relevant to everybody. So more than pushback, I would think it's like, okay, I'm glad we're talking. I mean, that means I'm not alone in this. Like everybody has those people, but dang, now I got to do something about it.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's why the series, the whole concept is so powerful too. We've been saying like those people in our lives can gain a measure of control over our lives if we allow them to, right? And I think everybody kind of goes like, dang it, you're right.
Yeah.
We all experience that. I'd be curious to know, y'all in this circle, us here, how do you do with those people in your life that you have?
Yeah, I don't. I probably lie to myself about how good I do with those people. Like I probably have a false reality that I'm like, I'm great, and then like ask me 3 questions about them, and I'm like, I'm not doing so great. So, like I have genuinely done like, and I think I had some passion behind it in the part 2. About the offense, saying to pray for those people. I really have done that. And I am a really big advocate of like how powerful that can be, like the longer that you stay there. And I there's all these caveats I want to give about that. Doesn't mean like it restored the relationship or but I just have noticed like a tangible, heart change the longer I sit there and pray for this. So I think in getting it right. Now, granted, those have probably been some like bigger offenses too. Like, I don't think it's just like, man, these like so-and-so that get that level 3 energy in your mind. And like, you kind of only notice right when they're in front of you or you see that group, or you see that post. I'm probably not as like conscious about all the ways that I'm like having the little like negative thoughts pop up. So some mix of that, some lying to myself, some I've taken that before God and been grateful. Some amount of like I ignore it and should pay more attention to it. And this is a good series for me to think about as we're delivering it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought going in a circle.
I don't know.
Unofficially
I
a circle.
saw a deep breath. So I like felt like something was coming.
Well, because I'm thinking it has evolved over time for me. I think I spent, and this is not like, I think I spent most of my 20s kind of trying to conquer a little more of what the deeper relationships that are those people, the people that are actually closer to me that I had to really process. And whether it was because of forgiveness or just owning my own stuff or just a level of like, kind of, and we did that whole series on Luke 15, like really forgiving the prodigal because I tend to be an older brother. Like that was a lot of my 20s, just really, and some of that came from just sheer obedience. Like I'm told to forgive, and in my personality that works for me. If I feel like I am told to do a thing, I typically perform better than so I was like, okay, well, I'm supposed to forgive, I'm supposed to honor, You know, when you think about honoring your mother and father, I know for a lot of adults, like their adult relationship is tough with their parents. But when I just like basically told myself, like, this is just a rule. You will figure out how to honor your parents because it's what you're supposed to do. So I spent my 20s kind of doing that. And then I think in my 30s was more part two. A lot of like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be taking everything personally. Maybe not everybody is doing everything at me. Maybe my teenagers aren't being teenagers to me, but they're trying to figure out their world. So it's a lot of like being, and also really just being unoffendable, trying very hard to like be like Jesus, where like it's just so hard to offend him. And he had very offendable moments, right? And he just still walks with grace and truth in this weird way. I have noticed, and I don't know if this is an age thing, you know, like the stereotypical like Karen moments, I'm having literally like daily. And so I don't know how like, and I don't know the people. I don't know their name. I just am like less and less tolerant of poor customer service experiences. And so I don't know, I'm literally becoming like, the other day I was on a call and I was so angry. This is not a good moment, right? But like, I just was like, well, since this call is recorded for quality purposes, please let me be honest with you about how I feel right now. And like, I was having an out of body experience being like, you are being so, this is not this poor girl's fault. And I said that a million times, but still did not. And I could have been worse. But my point is like, I don't know what that means. Like in my 20s, like the deeper core wounds, I think I kind of worked through a little bit. My 30s, not taking everything so personal and like kind of letting more go. But now my 40s are all about like, stop being that person. And I'll probably end up with like a Karen haircut by the time I'm 45. And
Yeah.
I don't know what that's about. But yeah, those people right now are for me people that I don't even know, and I'm not giving grace in those spaces.
There's probably got to be some balance in a life journey of like, I don't sweat the small stuff quite the same. It is harder to offend. I am more secure in myself, and I'm a little more blunt because I'm maybe not as concerned what you think about me. And so I say some things I wouldn't have said.
Okay, that might be true.
Like,
Right.
you know, you probably
That
got
might
that
be
dance.
true. But
think so.
I think my nightmare is I used to volunteer at a nursing home because my friend was like the activities director. And there are two kinds of old women in nursing homes. I'm going to get so much trouble for saying this. But they're the women that have let go, and they're just like, look, you know, life is too short. Let's just embrace where we are and what we've got going on and love everyone. And then there's just the super grumpy, everything is still toxic and negative. And that is my nightmare of being. Yeah. But I think they would see it as like, well, I just don't care anymore. I'm like, oh, I don't want to not care to that level. But you're right. I do think.
I do think it changed. Yeah, it totally changes, I think, with time. But for me, the biggest change was I never felt like things were happening to me, but I would get angry at like, how can people do this? Like, I don't understand how you operate like this, or how can you be mean to somebody, or how can you not think about that? And it really changed for me with kids because I was teaching them. I'm like, oh, when somebody upsets you, you know, we need to pray for those people. I know it's so hard. So I was telling my children to pray for people. So it became this. So then the kids would be like, Mom, did you pray for them? I'm like, oh, crap.
That's the worst when your kids reflect back what
exactly. So like for me now, there's specific like, I'm not a good person sometimes. Like there'll be certain things that happen, you know, like I'll see a particular car that does a particular thing. And so, but I've got in the habit of every time I see this car, I pray for that. I'm like, whoever this person is,
they're on the way to the hospital.
Yeah. Exactly. And you always think, and that's what I told my kids too, like you never know what's happening to people. So you're those people, but you don't know what's going on. I mean, maybe they're not completely oblivious. They just, something terrible happened or whatever. But I do think it's easier as you get older to kind of see, you know, see those people in a different light and choose something different, I think.
Yeah. It kind of goes on to the next question. One of the things I wanted to talk about a little bit relating to part 2 of the series, because we talk about, Jordan, can you reiterate what that slide was? It was like taking offense versus like living offended.
Yeah. There's a difference. Like, first of all, you know, offense is a moment, you know, so that's an event that happens, but like living offended is a choice, right? So if we choose to take offense, it builds fences, it builds walls in between us, and not just between us and those people, but I would say like around like our hearts as well, like our openness, our curiosity, our connectedness to people that matter most to us, to our relationship with God. Whereas if we choose to leave a fence, I just chose that as like, you know, you leave it behind, but I leave a fence. Now I'm building a bridge. Like I'm building that, you know, opportunity to connect with people, or at least walk out of what I'm trapped in. If not, walk to that person on the other side as well. So
yeah, no, that's helpful. I think one of the goals that I have, like in this, I don't know, maybe next season of my life, is to learn a little bit more about what it looks like to become an unoffendable person. And the reason is because I've sat on the other side of some people who are so unoffendable, it's almost frustrating, to where they're so quick to say sorry. They're so quick to be like, hey, that was on me, that's not on you. And they're also just a lot happier. They're very joyful. Their relationships seem to be a little more secure. They're very secure in their identity. And usually it's people with a little bit more life experience, like older, have gone through some things. But I'm curious for y'all, as you think about this idea of being unoffendable, what does that look like for you? Why is that important for you to become somebody who's unoffendable? What does that mean to you?
Well, as you were talking, I was thinking, like, for me, that just like a sense of calm. I mean, think about how riled up I get about things that have nothing to do with me and really shouldn't even be part of my response, you know? And so for me, like, to get to a point where I'm unoffendable means calm. Like, I can actually, in clarity, like, I can see things for what they are and not bring anything extra into it. And I can actually live a more calm and peaceful life and then extend that out to other people. So, like, calm and clarity is what comes to mind for me.
Yeah, this could become a rabbit hole thing we could go down, because even in message prep, we spent a while talking about this concept, because I said that one of my tensions in the series, and one of the things I didn't want to communicate, is like, for a long time, I associated maturity with emotional neutrality. Like, it's like, if I just don't show emotion at all, if I'm always the calm, wise sage in the room, like, I'm exuding maturity. And then, like, demonized healthy emotion as a result, and disconnected like head and heart. And so I struggle with that a little bit to even like put it into language, but I think some of the handles we were trying to put on it is, like, being unoffendable means like your identity is never on the line. Like, you're so secure in who you are that somebody could say, critique, do whatever, and it doesn't change the way you see yourself at your core. And also, I think in the response then is like, the response to wound is the response to defend yourself, is like the response to power up. It's kind of the repaying evil with evil. Whereas the response, like a justified act of like, man, this really is out of love, which sometimes is aggressive. Like, sometimes it's quick action. Sometimes it's like for justice, you know, it's these aren't always like, I get months to think about this. It's like a wrong just happened and I'm protecting a person immediately in front of me. And, you know, so that's what gets a little confusing about it all, is it's not emotionless, but can I, you know, I think as quickly as the offense comes, get back to like who I am, and then get to a place where I'm not trying to multiply the offense, but I may have to act, and it may be okay for me to be angry, or to be sad, or to be, you know, whatever the reaction might be. So
I think you made a great point that so many of the reactions that we would have when we take offense they just don't happen when you're really, really secure in who you are. And you're even, you know, to take it to a spiritual place, to like your identity in Christ, like, I'm a son, I'm a daughter of God, and nothing can take that away from me. And so no matter what you say, what you do, what you might think, like, you can still care about the other person and be very secure in your identity right where you are, right? And I think that is like, feels like a really important key to that clarity that you were talking about, and also like the idea to say, I can still be very secure and get passionate about things that I'm naturally passionate about too. Almost you get more passionate emotionally because you're more secure in who you are, and you know how God has designed you, and you know what he wants you to do with your life. You know what I mean? Like that feels like those are parts of those unoffendable kind of people too.
Yeah, it's just sitting with, I don't know if this is connected, but in my mind it's connected. Perkins, he'd be fine with me sharing this. I think he's, you know, leads the whole partner network in Australia. He was visiting on Wednesday, and we got to see him. And he used to teach here at Northpoint way back in the day. Was an elder here. And he has now created a whole series of content around like emotionally healthy spirituality. Like, he's a guy I have like a lot of respect for in terms of like his personal work in this area. And I think he like cried like 7 times throughout the night, like, you know, and describing different different things, like his kids, what God's like done in Australia, like at some of the simplest little moments. He like showing a picture of like, you know, one of his kids graduating, another one getting engaged, and like it was quick to emotion. And in my mind, it wasn't like this is some unstable guy. It was like somebody who's like very fully alive.
Yeah.
You know, and I in my mind, he'd be one of the least hardest people to offend that I
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
And so I think it was an interesting picture of that in my mind.
Yep.
I think when you are coming at from a position of being unoffendable, you actually accomplish what you're, even when you are offended, are trying to accomplish often, right? So it's because it's not about, I love that distinction too. Like it's not about using your voice or not using your voice, being quiet or not, crying or not. It's about like seeing the moment, like stepping outside of it, seeing it for what it is. And then I was working with one couple one time and just watching them kind of go back and forth with each other. And I was like, okay, so each of you have like a deck of cards or a hand that you're playing, and you just keep throwing, like laying down this card because you can. And it was like, what would it look like for you to just hold your hand for a minute and then decide what actually card is effective, right? So even in like a road rage or customer service moment of like I can say these things, and I probably should say some of these things, but slowing down, and again, like could be 3 seconds of slowing down to know like that is the card I want to play because it's actually what's going to benefit them and me. And so I think like when we think about really working to get unoffended, first you have to it's hard to recognize how offended you are sometimes. Like not everybody realizes they're living offended. Mm-hmm. And so I think that would be the first thing is like, you know, do you recognize that you just took up an offense that just bothered you? You just built a fence and not a bridge. Like you know, do you see that? Do you feel it? Then can you step outside it enough to just be like, hey, okay, I can go this, and this way. What actually is going to accomplish the best for them and for me?
Yep.
Which sounds like a process, but you don't have to like go make an appointment with a counselor to go actually process that. You can slow down enough in the moment to do it.
Yeah. One of the things I'm pulling from you guys is just that living unoffendable is having immense security in who you are, and it's also being able to practice curiosity given the situation and what's happening and the different cards you have to play and all that kind of stuff. Like it feels like those are two themes that keep kind of rising up in the conversation.
Well, and I think it's clarity too about yourself. Like, why are you offended? Like, why is that bothering you? Why do you get so upset about that? Mm-hmm. So it's not just deciding like what card to play, but why do I even want to play a card? Like, what's going on?
Yep. Yeah,
the brain for one, brain for two comes in my mind, you know, like brain for one is like now I've retreated into myself and either like, you know, defensive, or I power up, or I run, or I freeze, you know, because whatever you've just said has like triggered a core fear in me. Whereas like the more work I've done on myself, the more I've walked with Jesus, the more I know who I am, the more I can stay in the place of connection, even as you say things that are hard for me to hear and so on. I work to stay curious. And so, yeah, I don't know if that's just a different picture of it or not, but
yeah.
That enemy book that you told me to read,
yeah,
I'm like halfway through it.
Are you really?
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because we're like Buck has read it, Shane's like we digested it, and I gave it to you, and now we've all been like, man, we should have used this book in the series.
Oh, I mean, I just assumed you were, so I'm sorry.
No,
I mean,
no, it's all kind of new.
It's really good stuff, and again, a lot of this stuff we know. Like we write about these things, like what? It's like we know these things, we just don't slow down enough to think about them, and so when you read it or you hear it, it slows it down for you. But like thinking about how those responses start in the interior of the brain and then move their way out, and there are literally a gazillion factors that could make it hard for you to actually not be offended, right? And so the more you know yourself, the more self-work you've done. It's this weird sweet spot. I think being unoffendable is like totally not caring while absolutely caring at the exact same time. And it's a weird space to be in, and it does take work, but I think it's doable. I think that book's actually really good.
Yeah.
Really accessible, like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's called Escaping Enemy Mode, I think by Jim Wilder. Is that right, Jordan?
yeah,
Jim Wilder, James Wilder.
That's Wilder. It makes
Wilder.
sense in my mind.
Yeah.
What was his last name?
Yeah, he's got a wild last name, but sorry, that was terrible.
That was terrible.
I know.
Wow.
I know.
We can cut it.
Yeah.
Josh will probably slow it
Don't,
down.
though.
He'll
Yeah,
probably
slow it down.
I'm sorry. Okay, I want to move on to the next question. We've got some
Jim Wilder.
some big. Okay, Jim Wilder. Okay. So oh man, these are great questions. I want to have some time for these. Let's spend a short amount of time on this next one. So if we talk about being a person of security and not being offendable, I think one of the things that it enables you to do is exercise judgment in a healthy way. And Jordan talked about judgment in part 3 of the series. And I just wanted to drill down on that because that is not normal in today's culture. I mean, it's normal to not talk about things. It's normal to brush people off. It's normal to cut them out. It's normal to like unfollow somebody, cancel culture kind of things. It is not normal to exercise judgment of a friend in a healthy way. What are practical ways that we can do that with one another, and why is that significant?
Like, you mean like when we see something that we do want to kind of like, I don't want to use the word correct, but we do want to be honest about? Like,
Yeah,
how
it's
do we
like,
do
you
that
know,
without,
Jesus-
how do we give right judgment?
Yeah,
versus-
because Jesus said, hey, he said, still judge, but take the plank out of your eye before you go to the speck in the other person's eye. But how, you know, iron sharpens iron, like calling that speck out in the other person's eye could
Yeah.
actually be a gift to
Yeah.
them. But I don't think we know how to do that culturally in like a healthy way.
Yeah, we either just run around iron sharpening everything, or
Yeah.
we run around like, oh no, speck and plank, so I can't say anything.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know how this fits with your point about tapping into emotions, and I'm not contradicting that because I love it and agree with it. But in some ways, I think if you're trying to talk to someone about something, whatever it is, at least this is what I found. When people come to me, like if Jordan comes to me because he's got an issue with you, and Jordan's telling me his tension with you, usually it's going to be delivered with maybe proper emotion. I mean, like, that just really hurt me, or that really concerns me, or that really bothers me.
Proper emotion, but yeah.
But a little. But when you almost everything people say to me, I'm like, well, have you said that to him?
Right.
And it's like, well, no, because we're so worried either about what that might cost in the relationship, or when we get with you, the emotion kind of overrides just the truth.
Yeah.
And so I would say, like, and I would not say gossip, and I would not say vent, and I would not say rant, but I would say find a healthy person to just process with, and actually just listen to yourself, not even them, as much as, like, as a good counselor, just ask you good questions. And so I think, like, you hearing yourself say what you're actually thinking and worried about usually will produce a genuine heart moment, right? Where it's like, hey, I'm for you. I just want to tell you what use some of the language that Northpoint gives you. I'm prioritizing our relationship. I want to be real with you about what it's like on the other side of you, because I'm concerned for you and I'm for you.
Yep.
And then deliver that thing. I think that can be right judgment.
Yeah.
But we get worried about right judgment because of the emotional attachment and the fear of loss. Like, you might leave me if I tell you what I really think about your behavior.
Yep.
Well, and I think we can overthink it to the point where, like, it's really not my place to say that.
Yes,
It's
yes.
really, you know what, it's really not my place. Or, gosh, I just, I definitely have a plank in my eye, and until I have no planks, I'm not in a
Yeah.
position to say anything. So I think we can, and whether that's to let ourselves off the hook or we really believe that, I think for me personally, I think that's probably what prevents me from being more honest. I don't like to hurt people's feelings, but bigger than that, I'm like, gosh, who am I to share that kind of truth? Even when it's people that I care a lot about, it's like, gosh,
Yeah.
who am I to say that?
Yeah. I don't want to be that
Yeah.
person. Then you become those people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think on a practical level, just because you said, like, how do we do this? I do, like, what comes to mind for me is I think the best examples I can think of where something has been reflected to me, hey, this is what it's like on the other side of you, or where I've chosen to engage and do that to somebody else. There were already, like, rhythms of relationship in place before that where that would be possible. So it's not just like out of the blue. It's not just whenever we talk, it's judgmental or negative. It's like we had a regular repeating rhythm, and there was space in our relationship to speak about those things. And it might be 1 out of every 10, but it's like the other 9 were real relationship building. That 10th one, there was something hard to hear, but we've created the places for it. So it feels like it maybe limits the amount of people you can really judge, and maybe that's part of the point. Like, maybe that's like good. You got to be pretty close in proximity and know what's going on, but like, have a monthly, breakfast with your children, and have a, regular repeating thing on the schedule with your spouse, and, meet with your direct reports regularly, and, like, see your friends intentionally. Like, I think it's like, okay, well, I have pretty limited capacity. So I don't know if that's an always thing, but it does seem, even on staff, I mean, with the 5 commitments, I think that's what you're, like, the tools are, like, they're in place before we need to use the 5
Yes.
commitments,
Yeah.
which that's internal language for us, but it's something we use around, how to build trust with one another. If there's a gap between what I expect and what I experience, I'm going to believe the best. Like, that's what I'm doing until I can have a convo, but then I am going to go straight to you. And so, like, those are pre-decided. We're going to use that. If I need to judge you or you need to judge me, like, we need to have a hard convo. So I do think that can set the environment if it's predetermined.
Well, that may be a great thing to keep in mind, just like a blanket statement. Like, if you don't already have that in place, then you're right, it's not your place. Like, that should be a really great, like, point for us to stop and think, like, wait a minute, is this somebody I'm close enough to, or we've set this up already? This is how we operate. If it's not, then that should be your cue that that's probably not your place to judge.
Yeah, and am I open to them doing the same for me?
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, because I'm not open for that. It's probably not a good idea for,
Yes.
unless it's a mentor-mentee kind of scenario. But even that, it has a regular established rhythm, like you were saying.
I think for Jesus followers too, it is important for anyone, but I think for Jesus followers, we have to get this part right, because I think this is where we're representing such a big opportunity for people that if you blow this trying to be helpful and you don't already have that relationship, you're just turning people away from what we're striving for. We want them to grow closer to Jesus. And if we're trying to point out something and we don't already have that relationship with them and we do this wrong, it's doubly bad.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's just counterproductive.
Yeah.
How do we, I'm going to just push against that for a second. I agree. I mean, my personality is super judgy. Like, oh my God, like my favorite
Why
Bible,
don't we have you
freedom than
teaching
that.
this
my
series?
favorite Bible verse for a while was like, judge not lest you be judged. And I was like, okay, good. I'm fine. Like, you can like the measure by which you, right. 'Cause that's my temperament and I have to be careful with that. But like, how do we reconcile that depth of relationship, which I actually agree for effectiveness, especially when we're talking about confronting deeply personal things, right? But we don't really see Jesus establish a depth of relationship before truth is necessarily delivered. Like he didn't like go to the well every day and see the woman before he was like, you got 5 husbands. And
I don't know though. I the way I read that story is no, he didn't. But he had such immense security, such immense curiosity. The fact that he was at the well in the first place showed that he didn't care the way everybody else cared.
Yeah.
You
okay,
know,
yeah.
and by him showing up, and she's like, he's like, I don't care. Yeah, that was a relationship building sentence or
Yes.
moment or posture that he was in. I don't know. I just find that he's in those postures a lot, even though they are random people. And he's God, you know, like he's the judge, you know, and that's not necessarily our role with other people too.
But I feel like what you said is you can do that even in a 5-minute depth of like, if you approach them with curiosity, it's your posture.
Yeah.
Like there's a difference when I'm in like my Karen mode, and I hate it for people who are actually named Karen.
I know.
Because there's got to be a better
They
word.
just stopped
but like,
listening to this podcast
yeah, I know.
forever.
Like, well, gee, thanks.
Yeah.
But I do think you can. I don't think you have to have like 5 years with someone, you know, or like, you know. Again, I think that it's a much better principle and way to operate. But I do think we see often like just moments. But if you approach those moments with questions. Mm-hmm. You know, because even like you think of a customer service experience, or even like you were talking about the driving, like I'm asking myself questions about like, what if they're on the way to the hospital?
Right.
What and those, I think that posture of curiosity is huge. I think, you know, I mean, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have depth, but do you see what I'm saying about it? Like,
well, yeah, it's like this. So I haven't like sermon prepped for this answer and gone and checked all the examples. It's like a gut, right? But like the gut is like, if it was a go and sin no more command, if it was a miracle, if it like those come at the end of the interaction, and there was an initial like established either care or trust first. Do you trust me? Or hey, I care about you and see you, and now I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
And also to be fair, like a lot of the ways parables are not parables, but a lot of those stories, like there may have been weeks of interaction. And the way then it's written is like we get the highlight moment.
Yeah, it's a great point.
We don't totally know on a lot of those.
I think the woman caught in adultery is a great example, though.
Yeah.
Like it's the whole interaction and who's going to throw the stone, and then he's writing down the ground, and she's there the whole time, and all that stuff, and then it's just him and her, and then that's when he delivers the, hey, don't do this anymore, you know?
and I think the majority of people can feel when you're coming from a place of care and curiosity.
Yeah.
I think that we undersell we think our ability to perceive people is great, right? But we forget that they're perceiving too. And so they'll I think in general people will be able to pick up on if that's your posture.
Yeah.
I was going to say one really just practical thing I think that can help, because sometimes you have like the posture I want to have and the level of emotion I'm feeling about this issue or this offense or this thing, whatever it might be. And I think that writing down ahead of time, and I've even brought like a written journal to interactions with people and said, hey, this was important enough to me that I wanted to write it down because I care about you. I care about our relationship. And I think if I didn't write it down, I might not communicate it as effectively as I'm trying to. Mm-hmm. And so just like, hey, I care enough to write this down. And so I'm going to put this piece of paper here. I know that's silly, but it's just because I care. And, you know, doing that, I think maybe helps. It's a little clunky, but it's just practical to show that you really care and you're in that posture to try to support, you know.
I don't feel like that's like, I would love it if someone needed to talk to me about that and they took that time. I would never be like, well, now that you wrote it down, I'm not going to listen to it. You know, so I think that's great.
Yeah. So we've got about 11 minutes left.
Oh wow.
About 11 minutes. So, and I want to spend the
Exact.
rest of the time kind of following up on part 4 of the series, and we talked about, different types of forgiveness and reconciliation. So in my own story, and you just we don't have time to unpack all of these, but what I discovered is there's decisional forgiveness, which is making a decision to forgive. There's emotional forgiveness, where the negative emotions of what the wrong was are replaced with positive emotions. And then that's all something that just happens for you. Like, that's not between you and the other person. That's just for you personally. And then there's reconciliation. And reconciliation is building the bridge, is building trust back into the relationship. One of the things that I hear from people a lot in this kind of topic is, when is reconciliation with another person possible and not possible? And when do we have to? When should we not? Or when do we have to forgive? Like, all of those kind of things. And I've definitely got thoughts on it, but I want to ask you all first on just your own experiences with people, and as you distinguish between forgiveness and reconciliation, and what's required, what we should do, what sometimes is impossible to do.
Yeah, I do think this is one of those concepts that, if you've maybe been in church for a while, heard a lot of sermons on it, if you've done counseling, maybe you've heard the forgiveness and reconciliation are different. But I think if that's new, if that was new to people this Sunday listening to your sermon, that's one of those paradigm shifting before and after kind of moments. That's really freeing. A lot of people resist because they think it means all the way to reconciling, that person's back in my life and we're all good and cool, and that's a lot of extra work. So I do think, just to even point out, that's a huge fundamental difference, that the two are different.
Yeah.
And then in terms of when do I not my cold kind of quick logical answer on the forgiveness is an always, according to Scripture. I don't think we get a caveat of here's when not to forgive.
Yep.
Reconciliation is much trickier, and then there's multiple caveats in my head, but both parties just have to be willing. So there's an out of control part of you. You could have all the desire, all the intention, willing to do all the work, willing to go 99%. But there is that both parties have to want to do that. And so that feels like a piece.
Yeah.
Harder to measure, especially in our current culture, but I think there's a safety piece, so if it's an unsafe situation, it's an unsafe relationship, it's an abusive relationship, you can forgive somebody that's not physically safe to be around, and you don't need to go reconcile with that person and so on. You can forgive people that have passed away for this reason, our parents that are no longer with us, we can go through process of forgiveness with, that aren't here, because reconciliation is different. So those are the first couple that jump in my mind. Is it beneficial to both of you? Is it beneficial to your relationship with Christ? Is it beneficial to your values? There's going to be a lot of those questions that I think are part of that too.
Yeah, I think one of the best examples of is just when you are challenged to forgive somebody who is not repentant, or they're not sorry, or they're not even aware of what they did to you. You can't reconcile with that person. You can't build trust in a relationship if they don't see a problem with the hurt that they caused in the first place. And I think that's where the distinction is so dang helpful, because you can still free yourself and without having to do anything relationally with them. And that's the whole point of forgiveness. And so, I thought that was a great synopsis of, obviously this is a very emotional topic, but it's almost like if anybody's listening and has never like thought about it that way, go back and listen to what Jordan just said, because I think that was a really great distinction between the two. Jen, you look like you're thinking over there.
Oh yeah, I have several. Well, I've always used that, and I've always misquoted it. I always use the step out of the 12 steps. I always thought it was step 4, but it's step 9, and it says make direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when doing so would injure them or others. And I would add, or yourself, right? Like, so I love that even in like mental health and these structures and systems that have been in place for so long and have so effective for so many groups, like it actually makes a distinction. And I think for me, and maybe I just have simplified it. So when Paul says, like, you know, God who reconciled us to himself and gave us the ministry of reconciliation, I take that very seriously. Like, I have like a charge to work toward reconciliation. But then I also go to Romans 12, which I can only work toward reconciliation as far as it depends on me, right? And so I think those are together. And so I guess I always feel like that reconciliation, as far as it depends on me, is always asked of me. But it can be so different. So many nuances. I'm one woman who had a real tense relationship with her dad, but really all she could do, as I was encouraging her to kind of, what does that look like to actually go as far as it depends on you, was definitely not safe to have a relationship. She actually didn't know where he was. And I said, well, what if you just send a Father's Day card? She's like, well, I wouldn't even know his address. I'm like, just send it to the last known address. Well, it won't get there. I get it. Like, it's not about the other side of the fence, right? It's literally just about going as far as you can.
Yep.
And who knows, that evolves into nothing or something, but you'll be able to stand up and look and say, I did a thing that built a bridge. I can only build my half of the bridge, but I did a thing.
Yep.
And that matters. And so that's just what I was thinking about. I'm like, for years I have said that was step 4 of the 12 steps. Now I'm really mad at myself.
No, that's a great, I mean, step 9 or 4. It is a great
I guess it
resource
doesn't
point too.
matter.
That's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is one, I mean, I feel that with every series, but I feel like this one strongly where you really just wish you could sit down individually with each person and I don't mean that in like a relativistic way. I just mean like it's possible to create shame for somebody trapped in a truly horrendous situation. And they're like, but I'm a Christian and and we can create like that for people unintentionally when we're like pushing reconciliation. That's not what I mean. But also I think totally like give people an easy way out, like in a way that I didn't mean to either. Sometimes when I speak about it, like, oh, good, reconciliation.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't have, and it's like, oh, well, to your point, like as far as it depends on you always, sounds like a pretty like strong push towards that. So that's hard. It's,
But if you think of it as a measuring tape, right? Like that could be an inch 1 year or for a season.
Yeah.
And I see this mostly with adult people with relationships with their adult parents. Like that's really one of those relationships that we don't know how to measure or reconcile well.
Yeah.
And it's like we typically are like, well, I'm not going to be anything like them, so I push away.
Right.
It's like, I don't know that I find myself pushing for reconciliation in those dynamics. And I know it's not easy, but like consistently getting out that measuring tape and asking Jesus to make the mark.
Yeah.
Like, okay,
Yeah.
God, right now,
Yep.
I'm in this season of life. What does that mark look like with my parents? I had a friend whose dad was an alcoholic, and every Christmas he would get drunk. And the idea was I can't go there and take my kids in that environment, but he would go, take a present. If Grandpa was drunk, dropped off the present, left, called the next day, and said, just checking on you, and like called every time. But every time if he was belligerent or it wasn't a healthy conversation, he said, I'm going to hang up now, or we're going to leave this gift and we're going to leave. Like so but he always did it, and I think that that's.
It was always a posture.
There was, so the whole thing, I think that's the whole thing with those people. It's like,
Yep.
how are you standing toward them?
Yep. I think one of the things key in that example that enables you to reconcile as far as it depends on you is there was a boundary at play.
Yeah.
There was a like, I'm not going to bring my kids into this situation. And again, I wish we had more time to go into this discussion. But boundaries just feel like a really important part of what it looks like to reconcile sometimes.
Yeah.
And boundaries for me, I'll just recommend, I think, a great resource. It's by Lisa Tykehurst.
Oh,
and it's
yeah.
called Good Boundaries and Goodbyes.
Oh.
And it's, I mean, it's just a really, really helpful book because a lot of times we think boundaries like cutting them off or
Right.
this thing, but boundaries are following that verse that from Proverbs 4:23 that says, above all else, guard your heart. And I'm going to reconcile to the point in which I can still guard my heart and the hearts of my children and the hearts of my spouse and my family.
Yeah.
And boundaries are there to help kind of diminish the access that another person has to you so that you are able to guard your heart from any actions or things that you might do. And in that case that you just gave with the man showing up on the door, like the boundary enabled him to be able to go. And even I'm thinking about his wife and kids sitting in the
Sit
car.
in the car, realizing we can't see Grandpa this time.
Yeah, but she also knows her husband's going to protect her and her family by saying like, I have this boundary and this, I'm still going to go reconcile, but this is my posture. Here are my boundaries. I'm doing the best I can as it depends on me to be able to follow what Jesus calls us to do.
Yeah, I always think how Jesus talks about being the shepherd and the gate. What's that one? Where he's like, and I always think about that gate is to protect and like hold in, but also to get out or to come in. Like it's a gate.
Yeah.
Like there's a reason it goes both ways.
Yep.
And so I think that's huge. Yeah.
Well, I think we have to have grace with ourselves too in this process because forgiveness is not easy, and it's not something that just like we just want it to happen and we pray about it and it happens. I mean, I think and it may not be a linear process. I mean, you can think you're making these steps, and I think it comes back to the heart posture. Like, how are you feeling about that? Like, what does that feel like? And I think it's just a process. We weren't meant to do that alone, and so I think without checking in and without involving God in the process and understanding it may take some time, I think we can be too hard on ourselves and either give up or think that we have when we really haven't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is great, y'all. I feel like we could just sit here and talk for so long. I do want to just give people more if they're resonating with what we're talking about, a couple of resources to just point them towards. One, I think the book we talked about in part 4 of the series, Forgiving and Reconciling by Everett Worthington, super foundational for me in my journey. The other one I just mentioned, Good Boundaries and Goodbyes, Lisa Tykehurst, and then even the one we talked about earlier, Escaping Enemy Mode by Jim Wilder. Would you guys have any other resources you would share? Those are top of the mind for me.
There's the classic Boundaries.
Oh, Boundaries. What is
Cloud
that?
and Townsend.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's kind of, I know it's been out there for a while, but they've written it actually even for specific relationships now too. And so that's
Yeah.
helpful. Like if it's boundaries within a marriage, within parenting, within workplace, you know,
Yep.
so
Yep.
that's kind of, I think, a go-to.
Yep. Anything else y'all would throw out there?
The Bible.
Sorry.
Really? That was assumed. That was assumed.
That is already
really?
affirmed.
Thank you, Jordan.
I was thinking about yelling that out.
Were you really?
Yeah.
And actually, all of these other resources base their stuff on the Bible.
Yes.
So, hey, let me just say one last thing. We're gonna be done. Is just I do think, Jordan, to your point, all of these things are situations in which we want to invite God in. Like God loves those people far more and far better than we ever will. But he invites us to participate in that love with him. And I just think for all of us in here, whoever's listening, whatever they're dealing with relationally, these are worthwhile things to dive into, although they could be difficult and painful. Forgiveness, reconciliation, boundaries, all of that stuff. But this is also what Jesus calls us to do, to love one another as I have loved you. And so I'll just leave us with that charge, as we wrap up this series completely. To anybody listening and watching, just do your best, everything you can, insofar as it depends on you, to love one another, love those people that God puts in your life to challenge you in such a way that you have first been loved by Christ. And so,
You quoted the Bible there.
yep, that was
That's a
quote.
good. That's a good.
Good
Now
way
I
to
can
end it.
rest easy.
So thank y'all.
All right, end on that
Thank
note.
y'all for your time, and we'll see you next week for a new series.